Marcus Sterling slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal water glasses and sending ripples through the champagne flutes. The sound echoed across the private dining room of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, silencing the conversation at nearby tables. His face was flushed red, his designer tie slightly loosened, his eyes burning with the kind of fury that came from someone unused to being contradicted. "I don't pay you to tell me what I can't do," he snarled at the three investors seated across from him. "I pay you to make things happen. If you can't deliver, I'll find someone who can." The investors exchanged nervous glances, scrambling to salvage the meeting. One of them, a nervous-looking man in his 30s, began stammering excuses about market conditions and regulatory hurdles. Marcus waved him off dismissively, reaching for his phone to check his stock portfolio. He had more money than most small countries and the arrogance to match. Janelle Robinson appeared beside the table, her movements quiet and efficient as she refilled their water glasses. She'd been working at Le Bernardin for 3 months now, long enough to recognize men like Marcus Sterling. They came in every week, loud and demanding, treating the staff like furniture that occasionally needed instructions. She'd learned to stay invisible, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to endure condescension with a practiced smile. "500 million, Marcus announced suddenly, his mood shifting as quickly as it had soured. He leaned back in his chair with a grin that stretched too wide. "That's what I'm putting into crypto mining operations in Kazakhstan. My guy says we'll triple our investment in 18 months. Maybe less." The investors nodded enthusiastically, their earlier nervousness forgotten. They scribbled notes on their tablets, murmuring agreement with everything Marcus said. One of them, a balding man in his 50s wearing a Rolex that probably cost more than a car, laughed and gestured toward Janelle as she finished pouring water. "Marcus, you're absolutely crazy," he said, his voice thick with the false joviality of someone trying too hard. "Maybe we should ask the help what she thinks about the deal. Get some real-world perspective." The table erupted in laughter. Marcus turned in his chair, really looking at Janelle for the first time since she'd arrived with their appetizers. His eyes traveled from her crisp white shirt to her neatly tied apron, lingering with the kind of casual dismissiveness reserved for people he considered beneath notice. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice carrying across the private dining room. "That's not a bad idea. Let's get some street wisdom. A fresh perspective from someone who lives in the real world." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his expression somewhere between amusement and condescension. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should I invest 500 million in crypto mining or stick with boring old real estate?" The other diners at the table leaned back, anticipating the entertainment. They expected her to stammer, to apologize, to scurry away with her head down and her cheeks burning with embarrassment. This was their idea of fun, this casual cruelty disguised as curiosity. They'd probably forget about it before dessert arrived. Janelle set down the water pitcher carefully, her movements deliberate. She straightened slowly, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. Her expression was calm, unreadable, professional. For a moment, she said nothing, and in that silence, something shifted in the room. The quality of attention changed. The expected humiliation didn't materialize. "Neither," she said, her voice steady and clear. The laughter died instantly, cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. Marcus's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning, now edged with curiosity and something that might have been irritation. He sat up straighter, his full attention now focused on the woman he'd intended to mock. "Excuse me," he said. Janelle didn't look away. She didn't fidget or apologize or soften her statement with qualifiers. "You asked my opinion, Mr. Sterling. Neither option is sound." One of the investors coughed uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Janelle and Marcus like a spectator at a tennis match. The balding man who'd made the initial joke had gone pale, realizing his entertainment had taken an unexpected turn. Marcus's face flushed slightly, but his eyes sparked with something between irritation and genuine curiosity. "Really?" Marcus said, drawing out the word. "And what makes you such an expert on international finance and commercial real estate?" "Crypto mining is a liquidity trap in a bear market," Janelle said, her voice maintaining its professional tone. She could have been discussing the weather or the day's specials. "You're looking at regulatory uncertainty in 3 major jurisdictions, including Kazakhstan. where the government just announced new restrictions on energy consumption for mining operations. The legislation passed their parliament 2 weeks ago. Your upfront infrastructure costs would bleed you dry before you see any return on investment, and that's assuming the regulatory environment doesn't become actively hostile, which all indicators suggest it will. The table had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the kitchen seemed to have faded. Marcus sat up straighter, his smirk vanishing entirely. The investors stared at Janelle like she'd just performed a magic trick. Janelle continued, her tone never shifting from its calm professionalism. And your real estate option? You're looking at commercial properties in a post-pandemic landscape where remote work has decreased occupancy rates by 40% in major metropolitan areas. The shift isn't temporary. It's structural. Companies are realizing they can reduce overhead by maintaining smaller physical footprints. You'd be buying at inflated prices right before the market correction. The bubble's already showing cracks. 3 major developers have quietly started offloading properties, which means the smart money is already moving out. That's insane, one of the investors sputtered, finding his voice. How would you even know about Kazakhstan's energy legislation? That hasn't been widely reported. It was reported, Janelle said simply. Just not in English-language publications that cater to American investors. But if you're investing in Kazakhstan, you should probably be reading Kazakhstani news sources. Marcus's phone was already in his hand, his fingers flying across the screen. Kazakhstan mining restrictions, commercial real estate trends, developer bankruptcies. Every search confirmed what she'd said. Every single one. If you want actual advice, Janelle said, picking up her water pitcher, diversify into sustainable infrastructure. Water rights, renewable energy grids, vertical farming technology. The next decade isn't about speculation. It's about necessity. People will always need water, food, and power. And the scarcity premium is already baking in. Agricultural commodities are up 32% year over year, and water rights trading in California has increased by 60%. That's not volatility. That's a trend. She began to walk away, then paused and added, your champagne will be right out, Mr. Sterling. Janelle walked away, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Behind her, the table sat in stunned silence. Marcus stared at the space where she'd been standing, his mouth slightly open, his carefully constructed confidence suddenly feeling hollow. He'd spent 20 years building his reputation on being the smartest person in every room, on reading markets and people with equal skill. And a waitress had just dismantled his entire investment strategy in under 3 minutes. Did that just happen? The balding investor whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He was still staring at his phone, watching his carefully planned future crumble with each search result. The Kazakhstan legislation was real. The real estate warnings were real. Everything she'd said was not only accurate, but demonstrated a level of analysis that most of his paid consultants couldn't match. Who the hell is that? He muttered. By the time Janelle returned with the champagne, Marcus had composed himself. He'd rebuilt his mask of confidence, though it sat less comfortably than before. He waved away the other investors' attempts to laugh off the interaction, to minimize what had just happened. His eyes followed Janelle as she poured the wine with practiced precision, her face betraying nothing of what had just transpired. What's your name? He asked, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. Janelle. Janelle what? Robinson. And where did you learn about international finance? Janelle Robinson. She met his eyes briefly, and in that moment, Marcus saw something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Not anger, not triumph, just a calm assessment, as if she were looking at him and finding him wanting. The same place you did, Mr. Sterling, she said. School. She left before he could ask anything else. Marcus watched her go, something uncomfortable settling in his chest like indigestion. He built his empire on reading people, on understanding motivations and weaknesses and desires. But this woman had just walked into his carefully controlled environment and upended everything with quiet competence and devastating accuracy. The dinner continued, but Marcus's attention had fractured. He nodded at the right moments, laughed at the appropriate jokes, signed off on the decisions his investors presented. But his mind kept circling back to Janelle's words, to the implications of what she'd said, to the uncomfortable realization that he'd just tried to humiliate someone who was clearly his intellectual equal or superior. When the check came 2 hours later, Marcus added a 30% tip and scrawled his private number on the receipt. For consultation, he wrote, then crossed it out and wrote instead, if you ever want to talk about investment strategy. He left the restaurant feeling unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with the wine or the rich food. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his corner office on the 47th floor, staring at 3 different screens mounted on his wall. Each one displayed financial news that confirmed his worst fears. The Kazakhstan government had announced sweeping new regulations on cryptocurrency mining, citing environmental concerns and energy grid strain. The announcement had come at midnight their time, catching most Western investors by surprise. The company Marcus had been planning to invest in saw its stock crater by 60% in a single trading session. The commercial real estate developer his team had recommended filed for bankruptcy protection the following morning, revealing massive debts and fraudulent accounting practices that had been hidden for years. The properties Marcus had been considering were now tied up in litigation that would take years to resolve. If he'd moved forward with either deal, he'd have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus picked up his phone and called his head of security. I need background information on someone. Her name is Janelle Robinson. She works at Le Bernardin. The file arrived within 2 hours. Marcus dismissed his afternoon meetings and opened it at his desk, expecting to find nothing remarkable. What he found made him set down his whiskey glass with trembling hands. He read through it once quickly, then again slowly, his sense of shame deepening with each page. Janelle Marie Robinson, age 32, MBA from Wharton, top 5% of her class. Thesis on Sustainable Infrastructure Investment in Emerging Markets, published in 3 academic journals. Former associate at Goldman Sachs, managing portfolios worth over $3 billion. Recommendations from 4 different managing directors describing her as exceptional, brilliant, and destined for partnership. Then nothing. 3 years ago, she'd simply vanished from the corporate world. No explanation, no forwarding information, just an abrupt resignation and silence. Marcus kept reading. The next section made his chest tighten with something that felt uncomfortably like grief. Her younger brother, James Robinson, killed in a police shooting during a traffic stop. 23 years old, bachelor's degree in social work, no criminal record. He'd been reaching for his wallet. The officers involved were cleared of wrongdoing. The case was closed within 3 months. 2 months after James died, Janelle's mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Janelle had left Goldman Sachs immediately, cashing out her retirement accounts and liquidating her investment portfolio to pay for experimental treatments and specialists. She'd burned through nearly $300,000 trying to buy her mother more time. Her mother had died 8 months ago. Janelle was still paying down the medical debt. The file included her current employment history. 3 jobs. Waitress at Le Bernardin 4 nights a week. Weekend shifts at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Remote bookkeeping for small businesses, done in whatever hours remained between shifts and sleep. She was drowning in debt while working herself to exhaustion, and she'd still managed to retain the analytical brilliance that had once made her a rising star on Wall Street. Marcus closed the file and sat in silence for a long time. He'd mocked her, called her sweetheart, invited his colleagues to laugh at her expense. And all the while, she'd been carrying more pain and showing more dignity than he could possibly comprehend. She'd lost her brother to violence, her mother to disease, and her career to the cruel arithmetic of American healthcare. And she was still standing, still working, still brilliant. He felt sick, actually physically sick, like he might vomit right there on his expensive carpet. Marcus returned to Le Bernardin the next evening. He came alone, refusing his assistant's attempts to schedule a business dinner. He requested a table in Janelle's section, though the hostess tried to seat him elsewhere, saying Janelle's section was full. He waited. For 2 hours, he sat at the bar, nursing a single scotch and watching Janelle move through the dining room with quiet efficiency. She took orders, refilled drinks, cleared plates, defused a complaint from a difficult customer with calm professionalism. She never once looked in his direction, though he was certain she knew he was there. The restaurant began closing at 11. The last diners settling their checks and pulling on their coats against the October chill outside. Marcus waited outside in the cooling air, leaning against the building across the street. Janelle emerged through the staff entrance at 11:15, her server's uniform replaced by jeans and a simple jacket that had seen better days. She saw him immediately and stopped, her hand tightening on her bag strap. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice neutral. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, pushing off the wall and crossing the street. Janelle didn't move. "You don't owe me anything. You paid your bill and left a generous tip. Transaction complete." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." "I know exactly what you mean." Her voice remained even, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. "You're here because you looked me up. Because you realized I wasn't just some uneducated waitress you could dismiss. Because you feel guilty about mocking someone who turned out to have credentials. Because you're embarrassed." "Yes," Marcus said simply. "All of that. Every word of it." Janelle started walking toward the subway entrance. Marcus fell into step beside her, ignoring the stares from late-night pedestrians who recognized his face from business magazines and television interviews. A homeless man called out asking for change. Marcus, for the first time in years, actually stopped and handed him a 20. "I know about Goldman Sachs," Marcus continued as they walked. "I know about Wharton. I know about your brother and your mother. I know you were one of the most promising analysts on Wall Street before everything fell apart. I know you're working 3 jobs to pay off medical debt that shouldn't exist in a country this wealthy." Janelle stopped abruptly at the top of the subway stairs. People flowed around them like water around stones, everyone in a hurry to get somewhere else. "Then you know I don't need your pity, Mr. Sterling. I get enough of that from people who knew me before. I'm not offering pity. I'm offering a job." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was sharp and bitter, like biting into something rotten. "Of course you are. The guilty billionaire wants to hire the tragic fallen star. It's so predictable it's almost boring." "Chief investment advisor," Marcus pressed, hearing the desperation creeping into his voice and hating it. "You name the salary. Full benefits, stock options, signing bonus, whatever you want. You were right about everything. The crypto mining, the real estate, all of it. I followed your advice on the sustainable infrastructure play. I've made $20 million in 3 days." "Congratulations," Janelle said, the word dripping with ice. "You want to hire me because I made you money. How is that different from any other transaction in your life? You see value, you acquire it. I'm just another asset to purchase. It's not about the money. Everything is about money, Mr. Sterling. That's the only language your world speaks. You don't see people. You see investments, assets, resources to be exploited. I'm just another line item on your balance sheet. Then what do you want?" Marcus heard his voice rising and forced it back down. "Tell me what would make this right. Tell me how I can fix what I did." Janelle turned to face him fully, and in the harsh streetlight filtering through the city haze, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features. Not just physical tiredness, though that was there too. This was deeper, the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much for too long with no end in sight. "You humiliated me in front of a room full of people because you thought my uniform made me less than you," she said, her voice quiet but cutting. "You laughed while your associates made jokes at my expense. You didn't see me as a person with thoughts and feelings and a history. You saw a prop in your performance of wealth and power. You saw someone to demonstrate your status against. You're right. I know I'm right." She took a breath, and Marcus saw her hands trembling slightly before she shoved them in her jacket pockets. "You want to make it right? You can't. That moment is done. It happened. You can't unsay those words or undo that laughter or give me back the dignity you took for entertainment. But if you actually want to do something meaningful, fund a scholarship. Full ride to Wharton for low-income students. Every year. Not just one. Not just a token gesture. A real commitment." Marcus nodded slowly. "How many? What's the endowment?" 10 students per year. $50 million endowment, managed by an independent board. Not by you, not by any of your companies. You put up the money and you step back. And you name it after my brother. James Robinson Memorial Scholarship. For students who've experienced loss, who've had to be caregivers, who've had their paths disrupted by circumstances beyond their control. The students the system usually overlooks because their transcripts have gaps or their stories don't fit the traditional narrative of success. Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney right now. We'll have the paperwork drawn up by tomorrow." "Wait." Janelle held up her hand. "I'm not done. I'll consult for you. 6 months. I'll help you restructure your portfolio, teach you to see what you've been missing. But I work on my terms, my schedule, my conditions. And the scholarship gets funded immediately. Not after I deliver results. Not after you see what I can do. Now. Agreed. One more thing. Janelle's eyes hardened, and Marcus saw steel there that made him understand how she'd survived everything life had thrown at her. If you ever speak to anyone on your staff the way you spoke to me, I walk. No notice, no explanation, no second chances. I don't work for people who forget that respect isn't purchased with a paycheck. Dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right. Marcus extended his hand. After a long moment, Janelle shook it. Her grip was firm, her palms slightly calloused from work. 6 months, she repeated. Don't waste them. The transformation began the next morning. Marcus cleared out his executive team's largest conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. He had the furniture removed and replaced with whiteboards, computer terminals, and a simple desk. He gave Janelle access to everything. Every portfolio, every investment, every deal in progress, every contract under negotiation. His CFO objected. His legal team raised concerns about confidentiality. Marcus overruled them all. If I don't trust her with this information, I shouldn't be hiring her, he said. And if she wanted to destroy me, she could have done it when she walked away from my table at the restaurant. She didn't. She helped me. Now I'm going to listen. Janelle arrived at 8 on Monday morning wearing professional clothes that didn't quite fit the corporate environment. Her blazer was slightly worn at the elbows, her shoes practical rather than fashionable. But when she started talking about market analysis and investment strategy, everyone forgot about her wardrobe. She was brilliant, ruthless in her assessments, and unwilling to soften her conclusions to preserve egos. You're investing in image, she told Marcus during their first full meeting. You want deals that make you look smart, not deals that are smart. There's a difference. Looking smart is about impressing other people. Being smart is about creating sustainable value. You've been confusing the two. She pulled up his portfolio on the main screen. This venture capital investment in a celebrity-backed cryptocurrency exchange? Vanity. This partnership with a former athlete's lifestyle brand? Ego. This acquisition of a boutique investment firm run by your college roommate? Friendship masquerading as business strategy. None of these decisions were made based on sound financial analysis. They were made based on emotion and social positioning. Marcus's executive team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They'd recommended most of those deals. One of them, his CFO Richard, spoke up defensively. Those investments have shown strong returns in the short term. Short term, Janelle repeated. Exactly. You're thinking in quarters when you should be thinking in decades. Let me show you what these deals actually look like when you project out 5 years. She spent the next 2 hours systematically dismantling their assumptions. The cryptocurrency exchange was operating in a legal gray area that would likely result in regulatory action. The lifestyle brand had unsustainable overhead and a business model dependent on the founder's fame, which was already fading. The boutique investment firm was poorly managed and surviving on Marcus's money rather than their own expertise. In 3 years, you'll have lost at least $200 million on these 3 investments alone, Janelle said. Probably more. And that's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll be named in lawsuits when these companies collapse. The room was silent. Richard looked like he might be sick. Marcus leaned back in his chair, absorbing the information. Part of him wanted to argue, to defend his decisions, to prove she was wrong. But a larger part, the part that had been growing since their encounter at the restaurant, knew she was right. Okay, Marcus said. What do we do? We start divesting. Carefully, quietly, without triggering panic. We shift into sustainable infrastructure like I mentioned. Water treatment facilities in developing nations. Vertical farming operations in urban areas. Renewable energy infrastructure in rural communities. Investments that won't make headlines but will generate steady returns while actually helping people. This is boring, Marcus said, but he was smiling slightly. You want me to invest in water treatment plants instead of the next big tech unicorn. Boring keeps you wealthy, Janelle replied. Exciting makes you broke. Choose. They chose boring. Over the next month, Janelle restructured Marcus's entire approach to investing. She was relentless, working 12 and 14-hour days, analyzing every holding and questioning every assumption. She challenged his executives constantly, refusing to accept vague answers or unsubstantiated projections. Show me the data. became her constant refrain. Not what you think. Not what you hope. Show me the actual numbers. Marcus watched her work with growing admiration and shame. Admiration for her skill and dedication. Shame for the years he'd wasted making decisions based on ego rather than analysis. He started arriving earlier, staying later, trying to absorb as much as he could from her approach. But the real change was more subtle and more profound. Janelle's presence forced Marcus to confront things he'd been avoiding his entire life. The way he talked to his assistant. The way he dismissed concerns from junior staff members. The casual cruelty of assuming that anyone in a service position was somehow less intelligent or less worthy of respect. One morning, Marcus snapped at his assistant for bringing him the wrong coffee order. It was a minor thing, the kind of small rudeness he'd committed 1,000 times before. But Janelle was standing in his office doorway, and she heard it. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, one eyebrow raised, and walked away. Marcus felt his face burn with shame. He called his assistant back, apologized, and asked about her daughter's upcoming graduation. It was the first time in 5 years of working together that he'd asked about her family. "You're different," his assistant said later, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" "I'm trying to be better," Marcus said. "I'm sorry it took me this long." By month 3, the results were undeniable. Marcus's portfolio had stabilized and his returns were outpacing market averages by significant margins. More importantly, his reputation was shifting. Business publications started calling him a conscious capitalist, praising his pivot towards sustainable investments. Investors who'd previously dismissed him as a flashy risk-taker now sought his advice. But his board of directors grew increasingly concerned. The steady returns weren't enough for them. They wanted the explosive growth that came from aggressive, risky bets. They wanted the old Marcus, the one who chased headlines and courted controversy. "You're leaving money on the table," Richard argued during a particularly contentious board meeting. "These alternative energy plays are fine as a side project, but we need to stay focused on our core business model. Our core business model is extractive and unsustainable," Marcus countered. "Janelle has shown us a better way, one that's both profitable and ethical." "Janelle is a consultant, not a board member," another director interjected. "Since when do we let outside contractors dictate company policy? She's been here 3 months, and you're talking about restructuring our entire investment philosophy." "Because she's right. Everything she's predicted has come true. Everything she's warned us about has materialized. Maybe instead of questioning her credentials, we should be questioning why we didn't see these things ourselves." The argument escalated. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Half the board supported Marcus's new direction. The other half wanted him removed as CEO. When the meeting finally ended after 4 brutal hours, nothing was resolved except mounting tension and the clear understanding that Marcus's position was precarious. He found Janelle in her temporary office, reviewing agricultural commodity reports with the kind of focused intensity he'd come to recognize as her default state. He slumped into the chair across from her desk, feeling older than his 45 years. "They want me out," he said. "I know. The vote is scheduled for next month." "How did you know that?" "Your CFO's assistant is friends with the woman who works at the coffee shop where I have my weekend shift. Corporate secrets travel faster through service workers than through board memos." Marcus couldn't help but laugh, though it came out tired and strained. "I'm trying to do the right thing, and my own board thinks I've lost my mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm destroying everything I built because a waitress called me out at dinner." Janelle looked up from her reports, her expression sharp. "First, don't call me a waitress like it's an insult. I am a waitress. I'm also an investment analyst with an MBA from Wharton and a track record that speaks for itself. Those things aren't contradictory. Second, you're not destroying anything. You're rebuilding it on a foundation that won't collapse the moment market conditions shift. But that requires patience and courage, and most billionaires have neither. What if I lose everything? You won't. You have generational wealth, diversified holdings, and connections that will survive any corporate restructuring. But you might lose your title, your corner office, your place on magazine covers. Can you live with that?" Marcus thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, the answer would have been an immediate no. His identity was wrapped up in his success, his reputation, his status. He was Marcus Sterling, the self-made billionaire, the boy from Connecticut who'd turned a trust fund into an empire. Without that narrative, who was he? But sitting across from Janelle, A woman who'd lost everything that mattered and remained unbroken. Those things felt hollow. Titles and magazine covers didn't keep you warm at night. They didn't give your life meaning. They were just decorations, pretty trinkets that distracted from the real work of being human. Yes, he said finally. I can live with that. I'd rather be right than famous. Janelle smiled, and it transformed her face. Marcus realized he'd never seen her really smile before. Then fight for it. Not because you'll definitely win, but because it's worth fighting for. The board vote came 2 weeks later. Marcus spent those weeks preparing his case, gathering data, building projections that showed the long-term value of Janelle's strategy. He worked 20-hour days, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. Janelle worked beside him, refining arguments, anticipating objections, helping him find the words to explain what he'd learned. The night before the vote, they worked until 3 in the morning in his office. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights marking millions of lives, each one carrying its own struggles and dreams. Thank you, Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence. For everything. For not walking away when you had every right to. For teaching me. For believing this was worth your time. I didn't do this for you, Janelle said, not unkindly. I did it to prove something to myself. That losing my career didn't mean losing my skills. That I could still do this work at the highest level. You were just the vehicle. Still, thank you. The vote the next day was brutal. Marcus presented for 2 hours, showing data, projecting outcomes, explaining the moral and financial case for sustainable investing. He spoke with passion about long-term value creation, about responsibility to communities and environments, about building wealth that didn't require exploiting others. He talked about Janelle's analysis, her predictions that had all proven accurate, her vision for a different kind of capitalism. When he finished, the room sat in silence. Then the questions began, aggressive and skeptical. Richard led the attack, questioning every assumption, every projection, every deviation from their traditional approach. Other board members piled on, their concerns about quarterly earnings and shareholder expectations drowning out discussions of sustainability and ethics. The vote was called at 6 in the evening. Marcus survived by a single vote. One vote. The margin between vindication and humiliation, between transformation and return to old patterns. He emerged from the boardroom exhausted but triumphant, and found Janelle waiting in the hallway. You won, she said. Barely. If one person had voted differently. But they didn't. You fought for something beyond your own ego, and you won. That's what matters. They went to dinner that night. Not at Le Bernardin, but at a small Ethiopian restaurant in Brooklyn that Janelle recommended. The food was incredible and cost less than the wine Marcus usually ordered at business lunches. They talked for hours, about everything except work. About books and music and the complexity of living in a world built on inequality. I want to extend your contract, Marcus said over dessert. No. Janelle, please. I still have so much to learn from you. You do, she agreed. But you don't need me to learn it. You need to figure it out yourself. That's how real growth works. You can't outsource your conscience. But where will you go? What will you do? Janelle smiled. I'm starting my own firm. Investment consulting focused on sustainable development and ethical business practices. I've got 4 clients already, all referrals from people who've heard about your portfolio transformation. Turns out there's a market for this work. Pride and loss warred in Marcus's chest. That's incredible. You'll be amazing. I know. Month 6 arrived faster than Marcus wanted. His final official day working with Janelle approached, and he found himself dreading it. She'd become more than a consultant. She'd become a friend, a mentor, a moral compass he hadn't known he needed. The thought of navigating his business life without her steady presence filled him with anxiety. The scholarship ceremony is next week, he said during their final meeting. The first James Robinson Memorial Scholars have been selected. I'd like you to present the awards. Janelle's composure cracked for the first time since he'd known her. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly. You want me to do it? It's your brother's legacy. You should be the one to honor it. The ceremony took place at the Wharton School on a crisp October evening. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, donors, and press. Marcus sat in the front row, watching as Janelle took the stage. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion, something elegant that fit her properly. She stood at the podium with quiet confidence, her voice steady as she began to speak. My brother James believed in the power of education to transform lives, Janelle said. He believed that everyone deserves a chance to reach their potential, regardless of where they start or what obstacles they face. These 5 students represent that belief. She introduced each scholar individually, telling their stories with care and respect. A young woman from Detroit who'd worked 3 jobs to support her siblings while maintaining perfect grades. A young man from rural Mississippi who'd taught himself coding using library computers because his school didn't offer computer science classes. A first-generation immigrant who'd learned English in 3 years and graduated valedictorian despite starting high school unable to speak the language. A foster youth who'd aged out of the system and lived in his car while attending community college. A young woman whose parent had died and she'd become guardian to her younger siblings while finishing high school. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads: resilience, determination, the refusal to let circumstances define potential. By the time Janelle finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. Marcus stood with everyone else, applauding until his hands hurt, tears streaming down his face without shame. When Janelle stepped off the stage, he met her in the wings and pulled her into a hug. "James would be so proud of you." "I hope so," she whispered. "God, I hope so." The reception afterward buzzed with energy and hope. Marcus watched Janelle work the room, connecting with students and faculty, offering advice and encouragement. She'd stepped back into her element, the brilliant analyst who saw potential where others saw only problems. She was home. Near the end of the evening, Shanice, the young woman from Detroit, approached Marcus. She extended her hand formally, her grip firm and confident. "Mr. Sterling, I wanted to thank you personally. This scholarship is changing my life. My sisters lives too. They see me going to Wharton and they believe they can do it too." "Thank me by making the most of the opportunity," Marcus said. "And when you succeed, help someone else the way you've been helped. That's how we change things. One person at a time." "I will. I promise." Shanice hesitated, then added, "Can I ask you something? Why did you do this? I've read about you in business magazines. You weren't known for philanthropy before." Marcus glanced across the room at Janelle, who was laughing with a group of students, her face bright with genuine joy. "I learned from someone that true power isn't about how much you have. It's about what you do with what you have. I'm still learning that lesson every day, but I'm trying to be a better student." Shanice followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "She's amazing. She spent an hour talking with me about my investment thesis for my application essay. She didn't have to do that." "That's who she is," Marcus said. "She gives because it's right, not because it benefits her." "I'm trying to learn that too." 3 months after the ceremony, Marcus made an announcement that shocked the business world. He was stepping down as CEO of his company, taking a position as chairman focused exclusively on sustainable investment initiatives. Half of his personal wealth, roughly $3 billion, would be transferred to a foundation dedicated to educational access and economic opportunity in underserved communities. The foundation would be run by an independent board, and Marcus would have no operational control. The business press went insane. Bloomberg called it the most dramatic corporate transformation in recent memory. Forbes questioned his sanity. The Wall Street Journal ran dueling op-eds, one praising his courage, the other predicting his irrelevance. Marcus read none of them. He'd learned from Janelle that the only opinion that mattered was whether he could look at himself in the mirror with respect. He saw Janelle occasionally at industry events and conferences. Her firm had grown quickly, attracting clients who wanted both profits and principles. She'd hired 3 analysts, all from non-traditional backgrounds, all brilliant in ways that traditional recruiting would have missed. They'd maintained a friendship built on mutual respect rather than professional obligation. Sometimes they'd meet for coffee, discussing everything from market trends to philosophy to the absurdity of wealth inequality. One morning, sitting in the Brooklyn coffee shop where Janelle used to work weekend shifts, Marcus asked a question that had been weighing on him. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from Goldman Sachs, spending your savings on medical bills, basically starting over from nothing?" Janelle stirred her coffee slowly, considering her answer carefully. "I regret that the circumstances made it necessary. I regret that our healthcare system is so broken that saving my mother's life meant destroying my financial security. I regret that my brother died because of systemic racism that treats black men as threats rather than humans. But I don't regret my choices. I did what love required, and I'd do it again without hesitation. You're stronger than I'll ever be. I'm not stronger. I just didn't have the option to be weak. Privilege is the luxury of choice, Marcus. You've had choices your entire life. You've chosen to use your privilege well. That matters more than you know. Does it? Does it really change anything? I'm still a billionaire in a world where people are dying because they can't afford insulin. I've created a scholarship that helps a handful of students while millions struggle. I've shifted my investments to be more ethical, but I'm still profiting from a system that's fundamentally unjust. Janelle reached across the table and took his hand. You're right. Individual action isn't enough. But it's not nothing. Those 5 students at Wharton, they're going to change the world. They're going to become leaders who remember where they came from and lift others up. That ripple effect matters. Your choice to respect your employees matters to them and their families. Your sustainable investments create jobs in communities that need them. None of it fixes the system, but all of it makes the system slightly less cruel. That's worth something. Is it enough? No, but it's something. And something is better than nothing. A year after their first meeting, Marcus received an invitation to Janelle's wedding. She'd met someone, a civil rights attorney named David who'd grown up in the same Detroit neighborhood where Shanice was from. They'd connected over their shared passion for justice and their belief that the world could be better. Marcus attended the ceremony at a small church in Brooklyn, sitting in the back row and crying openly during the vows. Seeing Janelle happy, seeing her rebuild a life after so much loss, felt like witnessing a miracle. She deserved every good thing the world could offer, and Marcus found himself hoping fiercely that she'd get them all. At the reception, Janelle found him standing alone on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The air smelled like honeysuckle and car exhaust, that distinctly Brooklyn combination of nature trying to survive in concrete. Thank you for coming, she said, joining him at the railing. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for everything else. For teaching me, challenging me, changing me. For not giving up on me when you had every reason to. I didn't change you. You changed yourself. I just held up a mirror and made you look. Marcus smiled. Then thank you for the mirror. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. They stood together and comfortable. I've been thinking about that night at the restaurant, Janelle said suddenly. When you asked me about investments. You wanted to know where to put your money to make more money. But that was the wrong question. What's the right question? How do I use my resources to leave the world better than I found it? That's the only question that actually matters. Everything else is just noise and ego and distraction. Marcus nodded slowly, letting the truth of it settle into his bones. It was a lesson he'd spent a year learning, and he'd spend the rest of his life practicing. Success wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or stock prices or magazine covers. It was measured in lives changed, opportunities created, barriers broken down, dignity restored. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the city lights began to sparkle like earthbound stars. Music drifted out from the reception, laughter and joy mixing with the evening air. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, someone was working multiple jobs to chase a dream. Someone was caring for a sick parent, sacrificing their future to honor their past. Someone was being dismissed, overlooked, underestimated because of their uniform or their accent or the color of their skin. And maybe, just maybe, someone would remember Janelle's lesson. That the person pouring your coffee or cleaning your office or serving your dinner might be the smartest person in the room. That wisdom doesn't require expensive clothes or corner offices. That dignity isn't earned through achievement, but inherent in existence. That respect costs nothing but means everything. All you had to do was listen. Actually listen, with humility and openness and the willingness to be wrong. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, and he'd spend the rest of his life grateful for the teacher who'd had the courage to speak truth to power. The music swelled. David appeared in the doorway, beckoning Janelle back to the celebration. She squeezed Marcus's hand once and then returned to her new husband, to her new life, to the happiness she'd built from the ruins of her old world. Marcus watched her go, feeling something like peace settle over him. He'd been given a gift that night at the restaurant. Not the investment advice, though that had been valuable. The real gift was the mirror Janelle had held up, forcing him to see himself clearly for the first time in his life. What he'd seen hadn't been pretty. But he'd looked anyway, and then he'd done the hardest thing a person can do. He'd changed. Not completely. Not perfectly. He still made mistakes, still struggled with his privilege, still caught himself falling into old patterns. But he tried. Every day, he tried to be better than he'd been the day before, to listen more than he spoke, to respect everyone regardless of their position, to use his resources to create opportunity rather than hoard wealth, to remember that every person he encountered carried their own story, their own struggles, their own brilliance that deserved to be seen. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to fix the systemic injustices that allowed people like him to exist while people like Janelle had to fight for survival. But it was something, and Janelle had taught him that something was always better than nothing. Marcus raised his glass to the sky, to Janelle and David, to James and all the others who'd been lost too soon, to the students whose lives would be transformed by education, to everyone who'd ever been underestimated and proved the world wrong. To second chances, he whispered, and the people brave enough to give them. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about the people around you, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when someone surprised you with their wisdom or knowledge. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job or your circumstances? Have you ever underestimated someone else and learned an important lesson? Your story matters, and this community is here to listen and learn from each other. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Don't miss the next one. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll know when we upload. Until then, remember that respect isn't about someone's title or salary or credentials. It's about recognizing their humanity and their inherent worth, regardless of their uniform or their position. Every person you meet knows something you don't. Every person you encounter deserves your respect and attention. You never know when the wisdom you need will come from the person you least expect. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. We'll see you in the next story.